Hey everybody, welcome to Earth and Time, a channel where we explore human history as well as Earth history, and specifically where the two intersect. And today we're going to talk about one of those places. I'm in the town of Placerita, California, so just outside of Los Angeles, up in the foothills. And this area is very important to history, and one that I didn't know about until somebody told me about it here and I was driving past. But this is the site of what's known as the Golden Oak, or the first place that actually found gold here in California. So let's go learn about this valley, learn a bit about the geology here, as well as let's take a look at the spot where they first found gold here in California, actually predating Sutter's Mill and what we know as the 49ers. So let's get to it. So to start off with, I'm actually just outside what is known as the Walker Cabin. And so this was a family that homesteaded down here in the 1920s. And you'll see they actually made their chimney out of a bunch of the local rocks here. So we can actually learn a little bit about the geology just from looking at the chimney here. And I can tell you right away that a lot of this stuff has been pretty beaten up. And it looks like it's a combination of sandstone and limestone and some metamorphic rocks that have what we call a boudinage structure to it. We see some quartz up there. So this is telling me a lot of the rocks in this area, and potentially the rocks that were hosting the gold, were all these igneous and metamorphic rocks, which potentially would make a lot of sense as maybe the original source rock for the gold. However, there's an even more complex story to the finding of gold here and where it was actually occurring, which we'll talk about once we get to Golden Oak. We're just outside LA, so of course they filmed a lot of movies here, and this said this was the Walker's winter cabin. And this ended up becoming somewhere that was filmed and scenes in over 300 movies and television shows out here, including, you see John Wayne in the upper left-hand corner. Pretty cool. And we can kind of see here the front of the cabin. Again, they use some of these cool metamorphic rocks down below, and we can see an old wash basin here. And as I come in, you can see the fireplace, also made up of these metamorphic rocks. An idea of their old stove and how they lived in this small, pretty tight space. And we can actually see the bedroom in here. Now, interesting fact, so see how they use ropes here. So they used to sleep on ropes with a little mattress on it. And when they said sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, it was actually because they were talking about keeping these ropes tight so you wouldn't slump through while you're sleeping. Pretty tight quarters in here. So we're going to head on this heritage trail, and I grabbed a little heritage trail map, which is where I just learned about these Tataviam indigenous people that occupied this area. And I believe there's still some of the Tataviam people here. I will say, as I look around, knowing there was gold in here, I'm not too surprised. We'll talk a little bit about the gold that was here. It was a little different than hard rock mining. It was what they called placer gold. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is and what that means. Placer refers to a type of gold deposit, which is actually what they found here. And hopefully they'll have some signs along the way. It looked like based on that last billboard they did. So let's see what we can find out. All right, here we go. We are somewhere along here. Ooh, look at this. They have a section on geology. How happy am I? And here's the first one. Oh, look at this. They're speaking my language here, quite literally. Geology in Placerita Canyon. So it's a combination of metamorphic rocks and sedimentary rocks, which is what we saw within the Walker chimney. We saw a lot of metamorphic rocks, and we saw some sedimentary rocks that I thought were a little bit metamorphosed, but pretty neat. There's really three primary types. There's a gneiss, which is a metamorphic rock, which is basically an old granite that was put under a lot of heat and temperature and change. There's quartz diorite, which is actually an igneous rock. So you can think of the core or heart of something like a volcano. And then there's sandstone here, which is the erosional remnants of some of these other features through time. So pretty cool. There are actually all three types of the rock cycle represented here. Sandstone is our sedimentary rock, quartz diorite is our igneous rock, and gneiss is our metamorphic rock. So you actually get to see the whole rock cycle within this one canyon, which is actually pretty unique and pretty cool. Right, now that we learned a bit about the rocks, one of the big discoveries here in Southern California is that there was actually a lot of oil found here. And the oil was coming out of, actually towards the coast, was actually coming out of a formation called the Monterey Formation, which was a shale or mudstone that had a lot of organic material in it and actually ended up what they call cracking. It got buried, heated up, and oil came out. And then that oil was hosted in a number of different types of rocks, mostly sandstone out here. And they're talking about that early exploration in this area for that oil. Where we're standing right now, it's showing where we're at in this panel. To the right of me would have been a production well. So this would have gone down in and tapped in the oil. And the oil here they called white oil, which I'm actually not familiar with what white oil is. It must have been a very, very fine oil. This is a motor that would have pulled the oil up. So this was an oil pump. This would have been an early drill bit that drilled down into the earth to find that oil. And it would have been on the end of something like one of these drill pipes here, where you can see those screws. They would have screwed that on, and that would have drilled down into the earth until they found this white oil. I read a little bit more because I was not sure what white oil was. Apparently, most oil comes in a black oil form, and they call it black gold, right? But apparently, because of the nature of the rocks here, that black oil was actually scrubbed of some of the heavier elements and actually came out as almost white or clear, and they actually could take it directly from the pipe and actually put it in automobiles like gasoline, so you didn't have to process it as much. And it was a natural process from what we call the source, the area generating the oil, into the reservoir, the area that holds the oil, where they discovered this. Now, they discovered this, I think it was 1899 or 1900, but eventually the company went bankrupt that was finding this. But that white oil still bubbles up along seeps here in the canyon, and I'm imagining probably along some of the fault zones. So let's talk about some of the fault zones here. So we're in between what's known as the San Gabriel fault line and the San Andreas fault line, and those two fault zones are running parallel to one another and stepping over in what we call a transform fault system. It's the San Andreas fault's a gigantic transform fault system, which means that the plates are sliding past one another as opposed to going under one another, which is what you have in the Andes and places like the northwestern portion of the United States, or areas pulling apart from one another, places like the Basin Range or areas over in East Africa. So I'm not exactly sure what kind of fault is coming through this canyon, but with that step over between the San Gabriel and the San Andreas fault zones, you're going to create a lot of weaknesses in the Earth's crust, which is where water is going to preferentially flow down through, which may be why the rivers here, which may be why the placer or gold is here as well, all related to that faulting in the geology in this area. And often along those faults, we can have springs, or in this case, it sounds like some of that white oil is actually bubbling up here still within this canyon from whatever its original reservoir rock and source area were, somewhere probably thousands of feet below our feet right now. It is a beautiful park. One I knew nothing about. I happened to just be driving by, saw a sign for it, and then somebody I saw was talking about it and mentioned that, hey, there's this place called Golden Oak where they first discovered gold in California. And I put my historian hat on and I thought, well, I thought that was Sutter's Mill. But it turns out this discovery predates Sutter's Mill and actually brought in maybe some earlier gold miners, but it was really Sutter's Mill, right, in the late 1800s that led to, of course, all the prospectors coming out and places like California becoming this boom state, and places like San Francisco really starting to grow. I'm walking under a tunnel now with a bunch of murals here, and I see a coyote eating a mouse, a little squirrel hiding down there. This is a nice little scene, I believe, of Placerita, and it looks like those are some of the Tataviam people that would have been living along this creek. Oh, this looks like a story of the Golden Oak. So let's go learn a little bit more about that. And right here on the other side of that mural is the Golden Oak. It was in this location that Francisco Lopez found the first placer gold that was actually authenticated. He was pulling onions, and when he pulled up onions, he saw golden flakes in the soil along the onions. And of course, onions love to grow along the edges of rivers, which there used to be probably a fairly well-developed river system coming down here. Of course, it's been augmented by more modern human activity. But he pulled up those onions, saw those gold flecks along the edge of this river about 6-7 years before the main gold rush of the 49ers here. Francisco Lopez found gold and actually created a little mini gold rush down here in 1842. So let's talk a little bit about what a placer deposit, or placer, P-L-A-C-E-R deposit is. So a lot of times when we think of mining and gold mining, we think of people swinging hammers and pickaxes chipping away at the rock, or we think about gold panning a lot of times, specifically here in California. So the gold panning style would be chasing after placer. Hard rock mining's where you're swinging those axes, using drills and dynamite to get the material out, and then you have to process it. Here along these rivers, nature's already processed it for you. So all of the gold's been eroding out of some kind of hard rock system. Imagine where they would actually go and do the hard rock mining. And wherever that, what they call the mother gold, the actual initial deposit of gold in the rocks is that, starts to weather and it's carried down along streams with rocks and other debris and gets deposited along the way. And those are the same types of deposits that they were actually chasing after in Northern California as well. But this was that first discovery site of those placer deposits here. Placer deposits could have been within some of the older units here. So it turns out there was a big basin that was created here about 25 million years ago when the North American plate and the Pacific plate were really interacting with one another. And that big basin created miles of sedimentation. As hills were coming up, valleys were dropping down, all the material was shedding off of those mountains into these valleys. Now those valleys were made up of what we today call the Vasquez Formation. Maybe many of you have heard that term. Vasquez Rocks is a famous filming location, but that Vasquez Formation would have been one of these formations that would have deposited a lot of sand and debris from the mountains down into a valley and then been lithified. Eventually what happens here is they start with a basin about 25 million years ago. You continue to deposit into about 16 to 10 million years ago or so, and then eventually the San Andreas Fault sets up where it's at today about 5 million years ago. And when that happens, it actually starts popping all these blocks up between the San Andreas Fault and the San Gabriel Fault. And when it starts popping those blocks up, it's now starting to erode those old sand deposits, which were made up of these ancient mountains, which could be the source of the placer gold. So the ancient mountains are probably the original source. That material probably eroded out of that original source, got dumped into things like the Vasquez Formation, what's known as the Mint Formation. That stuff then gets rotated and popped back up again, starts eroding, probably getting gold deposited here in the streams and along the banks of the streams here. You could still have some of the original, maybe parent gold material, if you will, in the old mountains cropping out somewhere here that could add to that. But my hypothesis would be it's probably coming from that older Vasquez or Mint formations working its way down these streams. And that's how those fine gold flecks ended up in the onion beds underneath this golden oak. And from there, of course, you spawned a mini gold rush down here in Placerita Canyon. So Placerita, obviously placer, referring to the gold. So we can see a picture of somebody gold panning here, chasing after these placer deposits. So how does a gold pan work? Well, basically you scoop up a bunch of sand, you shake it, and because gold is more dense, it actually settles to the bottom of the pan, and you can, using water, you can slowly strip off the lighter pieces of sand and other material until you get to the bottom material in the pan, which should be your heaviest material, which will be your gold. And sluice boxes, which I have a picture of over here, work in a very similar fashion. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and start working my way back away from this golden oak, but I'm so excited that I gotta come see this. I love history, I love geology, and most of all, I love where they intersect. And wherever you have mining or a discovery like this is exactly that. It's where human and earth history intersect. So there's two big geologic events that happen here where geology and human history intersected, and probably even more. But what those two are is the discovery of the placer gold here that was coming out of these potentially old deposits, the Mint Formation, the Vasquez Formation, or maybe even eroding from some of the igneous rocks and along the fault zones with the San Gabriel Mountains or San Andreas Fault or something between the two. And the other really cool geologic thing here is this idea of this white oil, the idea that there's oil that came out so pure and clean that they didn't need to process it before using it as a type of gasoline in the early 1900s. Pretty interesting stories here, and ones I had no idea about until I was driving past here, and I'm so glad I can share it with you all. From this portion of the trail, we can actually see up in the mountains, which go up there, I don't know, 1,000 feet above me or so, 300-400 meters there. And a lot of this looks like it's this rotated Vasquez Formation or Mint Formation, which were thousands and thousands of feet thick that have been rotated up and are eroding down here into this river valley, which again goes with this idea, this hypothesis that I'm wondering if that was the actual source of the gold or placer deposits. I do know in Northern California what they've done is they'll actually mine and pull all that sediment out from these ancient rivers and these ancient basins and process that. And that's where they used to find a lot of gold. The downside is it's very damaging to the environment to do it that way. I do want to point out, as I was talking about this, I just turned to my left, and I didn't get squirreled, I got rocked, I guess. Whole nother definition of rocked. But we can actually see some of those sandstones and maybe that Mint Formation chock full of sand and gravels from one of those ancient basins across the road there. And so all that stuff's eroding and coming down into these streams. I know we're talking history and geology stuff. I want to stop and take a look at this. There's something called the Acorn woodpecker, who's a common resident here, and it will peck holes in trees like this one, and it actually sticks acorns to save within these holes. So a woodpecker pecked all these holes out and then actually stored acorns in here to eat later on. That is really, really amazing. And apparently these woodpeckers live in groups and they actually protect their acorns. In fact, I don't know if you can see, there's one right here, I think. Look at this guy up here, or girl. Hi, looking down at me too. I think that may be an acorn woodpecker right there in the tree above me. I hope everybody can see that. He's side-eyeing me a little bit because I think I'm too close to his granary here, as they call him. How cool is that? Oh, hi, there he goes. Whoa, there he is on the other side. Yep, he's keeping an eye on me and on his granary right here. All right, not only do I love history, but I love biology. That was so cool, seeing that and actually having the woodpecker right there. And I could share it with you all. And indeed, here they are. That's exactly what I saw was this guy sitting above me. This is the acorn woodpecker. Well, this is neat. I went to the interpretive center just so we can take a look at Placerita area. We're sitting down here right now, and this is a nice diorama showing Placerita, but really shows all the erosion that's going on in these hills up here. So all this stuff's eroding, all the stuff on the other side's eroding. So somewhere in all this, through that erosion, it was bringing gold down into this main Placerita Creek area down here, and then working its way down. Eventually, this is the spot where they made that initial find of gold, right down in here. With this amazing backdrop behind me of the hills here, the San Gabriel Mountains here in Placerita, I want to thank you all for joining me today to explore this new place where I knew nothing about, and I was so excited to take you all with me. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode and enjoyed my other episodes, please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notification. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode specifically, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Did you know about the golden oak? It was new history for me. Was it new history for you? What do you think about what we learned today? And share your own stories with me from this area or others. I love learning from you all. and learning with you all. So with that being said, this is Garrett again with Earth and Time. Thanks so much for joining me today. I will see you on the next adventure. Take care and bye for now.